Hello friends! How are you all doing? I hope you're doing well. Today, I'm back with another sequel from the Spider-Man series. It's a movie filled with an exciting story, action, thrills, and plenty of emotional moments. The movie is The Amazing Spider-Man 2, which was released in 2014. This movie, released in 2014, became hugely popular among audiences and earned a lot of money at the box office. So, today, we're going to discuss this movie. At the very beginning of the story, we go back many years to the events that marked the beginning of the biggest mystery in Peter Parker's life. Peter's father, Richard Parker, was working at Oscorp, researching cross-species genetics. His goal was to develop a scientific solution that could completely overcome weaknesses in the human body and treat various diseases. After conducting experiment after experiment using spider genes, Richard managed to develop a formula that could not only cure diseases, but also greatly enhance a person's physical abilities. But this discovery also had a terrifying side, and that ultimately put Richard's own life in danger. The owner of Oscorp, Norman Osborn, did not want to limit this discovery to medical purposes. In his eyes, this research was an opportunity for an even bigger business. He wanted to use the technology as a biological weapon and sell it to foreign militaries. In other words, research that could potentially save human lives was being turned into something that could be used against humanity. When Richard realized what the true purpose of his research was going to be, he directly opposed the plan. He was absolutely unwilling to let his invention become a weapon of destruction. Eventually, the situation reached a point where Richard had no other choice. He destroyed the special spiders that had been created for his research and fled the lab with as many important documents and pieces of information as he could take with him. He didn't just run away. He also recorded a video message explaining the purpose of his research and his moral position. In the video, he made it clear that even if the research was successful, the discovery should never be allowed to be used to harm people. Richard knew that Oscorp would not simply let him go. So, that very night, he and his wife left their young son Peter at his aunt and uncle's house to keep him safe. Peter still didn't understand why his parents were suddenly leaving him behind. He probably thought they would come back after a few days. But in reality, that was the last time Peter would ever see his parents. Richard and his wife boarded a private plane and headed toward a secret destination so that Oscorp's people wouldn't be able to find them. But no matter how careful Richard was, Norman Osborn was one step ahead of him. He had already sent someone onto the plane. In other words, even Richard's plan to leave after making sure Peter was safe had not escaped Oscorp's attention. A struggle breaks out inside the plane. At one point, a gun goes off, and the bullet causes a massive explosion inside the aircraft. Everything ends in an instant. Peter loses his parents, but he still doesn't know that their deaths were not simply an accident. Behind their deaths was a mystery, whose answers Peter would continue searching for many years later. However, Richard had already made arrangements before his death. Using his laptop, he sent the video he had recorded, along with important research information, to a secret location called Roosevelt. His goal was simple. When Peter grew up, he wanted his son to have the chance to learn the truth about his parents. In other words, Richard knew he might not be able to explain everything to his son himself, so he left behind evidence for the future Peter. Many years pass. Little Peter is now grown up and has completely embraced his identity. To fight criminals across the city, he regularly puts on the Spider-Man suit and heads out onto the streets. To the people, he has now become a familiar face, sometimes saving people in danger, and sometimes catching criminals and handing them over to the police. But the old mysteries surrounding his own life still haven't been completely solved. One day, a dangerous criminal named Alexei Sitsevich hijacks an Oscorp truck and escapes. The truck is carrying a huge amount of plutonium. Alexei isn't simply trying to get away. He is smashing into and destroying every car and person that gets in his way as he continues forward. The situation quickly gets out of control. That's when Spider-Man arrives. At the last moment, he saves an ordinary man named Max Dillon, who has fallen directly in front of the truck, and then hands Alexei over to the police. But Max Dillon isn't an ordinary passerby like everyone else. He actually works at Oscorp as an electrical engineer. Although he is skilled at his job, he is extremely lonely in his personal life. He doesn't have much interaction with other people and spends his life between his work and his loneliness. So, when Spider-Man saves him from the brink of death, the incident has a profound impact on Max. To him, it feels as though, among all the people around him, Spider-Man specifically chose to save him. This small incident creates a deep emotional attachment to Spider-Man in Max's mind. He begins to see Spider-Man not just as a superhero, but as someone special in his own life. But at that point, he still doesn't know that he is going to develop a relationship with that same Spider-Man in the future, one that will completely change his entire life. Then comes another important day in Peter's life, his school graduation. From the outside, it might seem like Peter is finishing a beautiful chapter of his life and moving forward on a new path. But deep inside, he is still carrying the weight of an old promise. Before Gwen's father, Captain George Stacy, died, he made Peter promise something. That Peter had to stay away from Gwen so that Spider-Man's enemies would never make her a target. Peter knows how difficult it is to keep that promise, because he truly loves Gwen. And Gwen loves him too. But Peter also doesn't want Gwen to get hurt because of him. So, after graduation, when Gwen invites him to dinner, Peter hesitates to go to her. He simply stands at a distance, as if he is trying to keep himself away from the person he loves. Eventually, Gwen comes to him herself and asks why Peter is acting this way. At that point, there is no way for him to keep the truth hidden. Peter tells her about the promise he made to her father before his death. Gwen's heart breaks. She realizes that Peter does love her, but there is an invisible wall between them because of that love. So, hurt by the situation, Gwen tells him that their relationship ends here. Even so, Peter cannot completely stay out of Gwen's life. Although he tries to keep his distance publicly, he always keeps an eye on Gwen from the shadows. He continues carrying out his responsibilities as well, rushing to help people in danger and stopping criminals across the city. But in his own life, two worlds are now running side by side. On one side, his responsibility as Spider-Man to save people's lives, and on the other, his fear of losing Gwen. And the collision between these two worlds is about to bring something into Peter's life that will make everything far more complicated than before. Meanwhile, another major change is about to take place inside Oscorp itself. The company's owner, Norman Osborn, is seriously ill and fighting for his life. His body is becoming weaker day by day, and he realizes that he doesn't have much time left. At this point, after many years, his son Harry comes to see his father. This meeting between father and son is not an ordinary family reunion, because Norman knows that after his death, responsibility for the vast Oscorp empire will fall on Harry's shoulders. During their conversation, Norman reveals a truth that had been hidden from Harry all this time. A terrifying genetic disease has been passed down through their family for generations. After reaching a certain age, control over the body gradually begins to deteriorate. The hands start shaking uncontrollably, and eventually the disease takes the person's life. The most frightening part is that Harry has already begun showing symptoms of the disease. In other words, he may be facing the same fate as his father. Before his death, Norman hands his son a special device. It may look like an ordinary piece of technology, but hidden inside it is access to countless secret files and research projects belonging to Oscorp. After Norman's death, this device falls into Harry's hands, along with all the secrets of the company that an ordinary employee should never have known about. Shortly afterward, Norman dies, and Harry becomes the new head of Oscorp. After taking control of the company, Harry immediately realizes that many things inside Oscorp have changed during his absence. He has no trust in the old executives, so, right after taking charge, he removes several longtime executives and appoints a woman named Felicia as his personal assistant. This creates resentment among the company's old employees because while Norman was sick, they had been running much of the company according to their own wishes. Harry's return is a direct threat to the power they had gained. Meanwhile, after hearing about his father's death, Peter rushes to stand by his friend. The two childhood friends see each other again after many years. Even after all these years, the old bond of their friendship hasn't completely disappeared. Both of them have gone through many changes in their lives, but to Peter, Harry is still the childhood friend he once spent so much of his life with. However, Peter still didn't know that this old friendship would soon put him in front of a danger that was also connected to his own past. Meanwhile, a completely different tragedy was unfolding inside an Oscorp lab, far removed from Peter's life. It was Max Dillon's birthday. But for Max, who was alone in his personal life, his birthday was not exactly a day of happiness. On top of that, the pressure from his job at the company was intense. So, even on his special day, he had to stay alone in the lab to fix an electrical problem. Experiments involving genetically modified electric eels were being conducted in that lab. These were not ordinary eels. Because they had been genetically modified, they had the ability to generate enormous amounts of electricity inside their bodies. While trying to fix the system, Max suffered a horrific accident. Suddenly, he was hit by an electric shock, lost his balance, and fell into the experimental tank. Within moments, the genetically modified eels attacked him, and an enormous amount of electrical energy began flowing through his body. From the outside, it appeared that Max had died right there. But for Oscorp, this was not simply the death of an employee. Fearing damage to the company's reputation, Vice President Donald Mencken ordered the accident to be kept secret. In other words, even though a man had died inside the lab, the company considered Oscorp's name and business interests more important than his life. But they didn't know that Max's story was far from over. Incredibly, after a short while, Max's body began moving again. The tremendous electrical energy that had passed through his body had transformed him into something completely different from an ordinary human being. Every part of his body seemed to have become a living source of electricity. A bluish light began to radiate from his body, and he could absorb the electricity around him into his own body. And this was how a new character was born, Electro. After leaving the lab and reaching a populated area, Max began drawing power from nearby electrical wires and the power supply system just to keep his body functioning. But he still didn't fully understand what had actually happened to him. To him, it felt like he had survived and that something unbelievable had happened to his life. At that exact time, Peter was meeting Gwen nearby. Gwen would soon be leaving to study at Oxford, so she wanted to meet Peter and make one thing clear. Even though their relationship had ended, she at least wanted to maintain their friendship. Peter still hadn't been able to forget her. But because of the promise he had made to Captain Stacy, he was trying to hold back his feelings. Suddenly, when chaos breaks out across the city, Peter realizes that this isn't an ordinary accident. Someone with extraordinary power is absorbing electricity and spreading panic throughout the area. Peter no longer has time to sit around thinking about his feelings. He puts on the Spider-Man suit and heads straight toward Max. But surprisingly, Max isn't afraid when he first sees him. Instead, he becomes incredibly happy. Because in his eyes, Spider-Man is the beloved hero who once saved him from death. Max still holds on to the belief that Spider-Man knows him and considers him important. But the situation changes very quickly. A police officer accidentally fires a shot at Max. Panic spreads throughout the area, people begin screaming, and everyone starts talking about Spider-Man as well. Max's insecurity and loneliness suddenly turn into anger. He begins to feel that everyone is afraid of him, and now even Spider-Man is looking at him not as a person, but as a villain. The same Max who had been happy just moments earlier when he saw his favorite hero suddenly turns against Spider-Man. An intense fight begins. Because of his ability to control electricity, Max quickly becomes incredibly powerful. Peter realizes that he can't stop him with brute force alone. So, by using strategy, he eventually manages to defeat Max, and Max is taken to a special facility for research. But Peter still doesn't realize that this man will eventually become one of his most dangerous enemies. Meanwhile, Harry Osborn begins digging through Oscorp's classified information using the special device left behind by his father. As he opens file after file, he discovers research connected to his father's old work. He learns that a drug had been developed using spider DNA that could eliminate various weaknesses in the human body and give a person extraordinary physical abilities. Harry hasn't forgotten about his illness. He knows that the same genetic disease that is killing his father is also present in his own body. So, to him, this research is no longer just a scientific discovery. It is a possible chance at survival. And when he learns that Spider-Man's body may also have been affected by the same research, an idea begins to form in his mind. Harry starts to believe that if an ordinary person like Peter suddenly gains such extraordinary abilities, then the secret behind that transformation must be hidden inside his body. In other words, if Spider-Man can be found, then perhaps his blood or genetic alteration could be used to treat Harry's deadly disease. And from this point on, the friendship between Peter, Parker and Harry Osborn slowly begins moving toward a conflict where one man's desire to survive will collide with the other man's secret identity. Ever since learning about his illness, Harry has become desperate. He knows that the same genetic disease that affected his father has already begun taking hold of his own body. As time passes, his condition continues to worsen. So, when he learns that there is a change in Spider-Man's body connected to his father's old research, he sees it as his last chance to survive. Eventually, Harry sends a request through Peter asking Spider-Man to give him some of his blood. He hopes that if Spider-Man's blood can be injected into his body, it might free him from the hereditary disease. But Spider-Man refuses the request. Peter knows there is no guarantee that the genetic changes in his body will react safely in Harry's case. If the blood doesn't match or Harry's body rejects it, instead of curing his disease, it could actually kill him. So, even though Peter wants to save Harry, he isn't willing to take that risk, but Harry is no longer in a position to look at the situation rationally. To him, it's very simple. He is moving toward death, and the one person who may have a chance to save him is refusing to help. As a result, after being rejected, Harry begins developing resentment toward Peter. The place where their friendship once stood slowly fills with hurt, frustration, and a desire for revenge. Meanwhile, Peter is also chasing the old mystery surrounding his family. After searching for a long time, he finally discovers an abandoned secret laboratory belonging to his father, Richard Parker. The lab seems as though it has been frozen outside of time for many years. There, Peter finds information that begins answering some of the biggest questions of his life. At one point, he discovers the old video message his father left behind. In the video, Richard talks about his research and explains why he had to flee Oscorp. Peter then learns that his parents' disappearance was not an ordinary accident. Richard had stood against Norman Osborn's greed and his plan to turn Richard's discovery into a biological weapon. Ultimately, he and his wife paid for that decision with their lives. In other words, the mystery Peter had been searching for all these years was centered around Oscorp and Norman Osborn's greed. But Richard had left behind another important piece of information in the video. He explains that the research created using spider DNA would not work the same way in everyone's body. For the formula to work properly, Richard Parker's own genetic material, or the DNA of one of his descendants, was required. Using it on someone else could have deadly consequences. This information would later determine Harry's fate. Meanwhile, Harry's assistant Felicia gives him another important piece of information. The special drug had not been completely destroyed. It was being stored inside a secret room within the Oscorp building. That means Harry still has a chance to survive. While using the device his father gave him to search through Oscorp's classified information, Harry discovers another terrifying truth. Max Dillon is not dead. After the accident, he has been secretly imprisoned, and experiments are being conducted on his body. But no matter how hard Harry tries to regain control, Oscorp's old executives do not trust him. At that exact moment, Donald Mencken steps forward and places all the blame for Max's accident on Harry. To protect the company's interests and maintain his own power, he removes Harry from his position as CEO of Oscorp. In an instant, Harry becomes powerless inside his own father's company. Now, Harry is facing two things at once: the fear of death and the humiliation of losing his power. And in the middle of those two things, he finds someone who is burning with the same desire for revenge: Max Dillon. Harry goes directly to Max. He tells him that if he wants, he can escape from his imprisonment. Not only that, he will also have a chance to get revenge on Spider-Man. In return, Max has to help Harry with something. Max has no reason to reject the offer. The man who once considered Spider-Man his hero now has an intense hatred for that same person building inside him. As soon as Max agrees to Harry's plan, he releases all the electrical energy stored inside his body. The equipment around him begins shaking. The flow of electricity spirals out of control, and using that very power, he breaks free from his captivity. Now, he is no longer the lonely electrical engineer Max Dillon. He is completely Electro. Harry and Electro then return to Oscorp together. They have only one goal: to get the secret drug from Donald Mencken. In the end, they force him to reveal the location of the secret room. When Harry gets his hands on the special drug, he doesn't wait any longer. Hoping to save his life, he injects the drug directly into his body. At first, it seems like a miracle has happened. The symptoms of his disease begin to fade, and his weakness starts to disappear. Harry believes that he has finally escaped his father's curse. But the happiness doesn't last long, because he doesn't know that the most important condition of Richard's research has not been met in his case. The drug will not work properly in anyone's body unless it contains the genetic material of Richard Parker or one of his descendants. And Harry becomes the victim of that failed experiment. Within moments, terrifying changes begin taking place in his body. Instead of curing his disease, the drug makes his body stronger, more deformed, and more violent. Harry loses his normal human appearance and transforms into a massive green monster, giving birth to the Green Goblin. To control his new powers, Harry takes a special suit and glider from the lab and heads out. His mind is no longer focused only on survival. Now he has one goal: to find Spider-Man, blame him for the misfortune that has destroyed his life, and take revenge. Meanwhile, the next step in Harry's plan begins with Electro. He attacks the city's main power station. His body has essentially become a massive source of electricity. He takes control of the power station and cuts off electricity to the entire city. In an instant, New York is plunged into darkness. Emergency systems in hospitals begin failing, airport operations come to a halt, and chaos spreads through the streets. Thousands of people have no idea why the entire city suddenly went dark. After hearing the news, Spider-Man rushes to the power station. When he gets there, he comes face to face with Electro. A battle begins in which Peter's webs and physical strength are up against Electro's enormous electrical powers. No matter how hard Peter tries, he cannot stop Electro through sheer force. But Peter doesn't know that he isn't fighting this battle alone. Peter had repeatedly told Gwen to stay away from danger. But Gwen is not the kind of person who can sit safely somewhere while Peter is putting himself in danger. So, ignoring his warning, Gwen also makes her way there. After observing the situation, Gwen realizes that Electro's body is now functioning almost like a giant battery. The more electricity he absorbs, the stronger he becomes. That means the electricity itself could also be the way to defeat him. Gwen gives Peter an idea. They need to send a controlled amount of excess electricity through Electro's body. In other words, instead of simply making him stronger, they need to give him so much energy that his body can no longer contain it. The plan is risky, but Peter realizes that this is their only chance. Together, they put the strategy into action. As Electro continues absorbing more and more electricity, he goes beyond the limits of his own power. In an instant, the energy inside his body becomes uncontrollable, and Electro is defeated in a massive explosion. The city's electricity comes back on. The darkness disappears and the lights turn back on, while people breathe a sigh of relief. But Peter still doesn't know that defeating Electro doesn't mean the danger is over. Because hidden behind the darkness that had engulfed the city, another enemy was waiting for him, the Green Goblin. And this enemy was someone Peter once considered his closest friend. At the very beginning of the story, we go back to the past, where the biggest mystery of Peter Parker's life began. Peter's father, Richard Parker, was working at Oscorp on cross-species genetics research. After conducting experiment after experiment with spider genes, he was on the path to creating a revolutionary drug that could correct genetic defects in the human body. Not only could it cure diseases, but if used correctly, the technology could also greatly enhance a person's physical abilities. But the problem wasn't the discovery itself. The problem was Norman Osborn's plan for it. Norman, the owner of Oscorp, wanted to use this technology not for medicine, but as a living biological weapon to sell to foreign militaries. Richard knew that if his research fell into the wrong hands, it could bring terrible destruction instead of helping people. So, risking his job, his research, and even his future, he rejected Norman's proposal. Eventually, he destroyed the genetically modified spiders in the laboratory and escaped with the most important research documents. Before leaving, he also recorded a video message for himself, clearly stating that even if the research succeeded, he would never allow it to be used against humanity. That same night, Richard and his wife left Peter at his aunt and uncle's house. From the outside, it seemed like they had made that decision simply to keep their son safe. But in reality, they knew that Oscorp was following them. So, to hide their whereabouts, they boarded a private plane and headed toward an unknown destination. While on the plane, Richard used his laptop to send the video and the important research information to a secret location called Roosevelt, so that one day, when Peter grew up, he could learn the truth about his parents. But Richard had no idea that Norman Osborn was watching him so closely that he had even placed one of his men on the plane. Suddenly, a struggle breaks out with the man, and a gun goes off. Within moments, the plane explodes, and Peter's parents lose their lives right there. Yet, little Peter still didn't know that his parents' deaths were not an ordinary accident. Hidden behind them was the secret history of Oscorp's power, greed, and dangerous research. Several years have passed. Peter Parker is no longer just an ordinary college student. He is now a familiar face fighting criminals in the dark streets of the city. Spider-Man. Keeping his identity secret, he goes out into the streets of New York every day to help people in danger. One day, a criminal named Alexei Sitsevich hijacks an Oscorp truck loaded with plutonium and starts fleeing. As he drives recklessly, one car after another gets hit, and terrified people run through the streets. At that exact moment, an innocent man named Max Dillon falls directly in front of the truck. At the last second, Spider-Man arrives and saves him from death. After handing Alexei over to the police, Peter leaves the scene. But this small incident has a huge impact on Max's life. Max is actually an electrical engineer at Oscorp. Although he is busy with his work, he is almost completely alone in his personal life. As someone who rarely receives any attention from others, Spider-Man becomes his only source of inspiration. So, when that hero saves his life, Max begins to feel that even among all those people, Spider-Man recognized him and saw him as someone special. This seemingly small incident creates an even deeper admiration for Spider-Man in Max's mind. Peter is then seen at his school graduation ceremony. Gwen is supposed to be there beside him during this important moment in his life. But Peter is still carrying the weight of an old promise. Before Gwen's father, Captain George Stacy, died, he asked Peter to keep his daughter away from the dangers surrounding his life. Because if Peter continued making enemies as Spider-Man, those enemies might eventually target Gwen. So, despite being in love with her, Peter believes that he needs to distance himself from Gwen for her own safety. That's why, when Gwen approaches him, Peter opens up about what he has been feeling. He tells her that he does love her, but he cannot break the promise he made to her father. Hearing this, Gwen is deeply hurt and tells him that their relationship ends here. But even after their relationship ends, Peter cannot push Gwen completely out of his heart. Without revealing his identity, he continues watching over her from a distance. At the same time, he continues carrying out his responsibilities as Spider-Man. Meanwhile, on the other side, Oscorp's owner Norman Osborn is on his deathbed. A mysterious illness that has plagued him for years is slowly destroying his body. When his son Harry returns to see him after many years, Norman reveals a terrifying family secret. A genetic disease has been passed down through their family, causing severe changes in the body after a person reaches a certain age. The hands begin to shake, the body becomes weaker, and the person gradually moves toward death. The most frightening part is that Harry has already begun showing the early symptoms of the disease. In other words, he is facing the same fate as his father. Before his death, Norman gives his son a special device that provides access to highly classified information and technology inside Oscorp. Soon afterward, Norman dies, and Harry becomes the new head of Oscorp. As soon as Harry takes power, he begins changing the company's old structure. He removes the people who had been taking advantage of Norman's illness to run the company, according to their own interests, and appoints a trusted employee named Felicia as his assistant. After hearing about his father's death, Peter also comes to see Harry. When the two old friends meet again after so many years, their old friendship slowly begins to return. But at the same time, Max Dillon's life is moving toward an event that will completely change him. Even on his own birthday, Max is under so much pressure from work that he has to stay alone at the Oscorp lab to fix an electrical problem. That same lab is conducting experiments on specially genetically modified electric eels that are capable of generating enormous amounts of electricity. While working, Max suddenly receives a powerful electric shock, loses his balance, and falls into the experimental tank. Within moments, the eels attack his body, and a massive amount of electricity flows through him. From the outside, it appears that Max has died right there. But fearing damage to its reputation, Oscorp decides not to reveal the accident. Donald Mencken orders everyone to keep what happened a secret. But the real story is only beginning. The massive electrical shock doesn't kill Max. Instead, it causes an abnormal transformation inside his body, turning him into a living source of electricity. After a while, his lifeless body begins to move again. With his strange body glowing blue, Max walks out of the lab and starts absorbing energy from the electrical wires around him just to keep his body functioning. At this time, Peter is meeting with Gwen. Gwen will soon be leaving to study at Oxford. So even though their relationship has ended, she wants them to at least remain friends. But when Peter suddenly hears about an abnormal electrical disturbance somewhere in the city, he realizes that something is wrong. He immediately puts on the Spider-Man suit and rushes to the scene. When he gets there, he sees Max. At first, Max is actually happy to see Spider-Man standing in front of him, because the person he has admired for so long is finally right there. But the situation quickly changes. A police officer accidentally fires a shot at him, and people around them begin screaming Spider-Man's name in fear. Max feels that everyone is seeing him as an enemy, and that Spider-Man has also come to stop him. The anger inside him explodes. A fierce battle begins between Spider-Man and Max. In the end, Peter uses his intelligence and abilities to defeat him. Max is then taken to a special research facility and imprisoned, where experiments begin being conducted on him. Meanwhile, Harry uses the device left behind by his father to search through Oscorp's classified information. That's when he discovers the research. From many years ago, a special drug created, using spider DNA that could eliminate weaknesses in the human body and make a person extraordinarily strong. Harry reaches a conclusion. He believes that the extraordinary abilities of Spider-Man must be connected to this research. In other words, Spider-Man's body may contain the genetic effects of that drug. And if Spider-Man's blood could be put into Harry's body, perhaps his hereditary disease could also be cured. Hoping to save his own life, Harry sends a request through Peter, asking Spider-Man for his blood. Peter is now faced with a difficult decision. He explains that giving this kind of blood directly to another person is extremely dangerous. If the genetic changes in his body do not match Harry's, the treatment could end up killing him instead of curing him. So Peter refuses to help. But to Harry, this rejection feels like his last remaining hope has been taken away. The person he considered his friend is the very person who refuses to give him the most important help of his life. And from that moment on, Harry's anger toward Peter slowly begins turning into a desire for revenge. Meanwhile, while searching for the truth behind his parents' disappearance, Peter finally discovers an old, abandoned secret laboratory belonging to his father. There, he finds the video Richard Parker left behind. After waiting for so many years, Peter finally learns that his parents' disappearance was not an accident. They had stood against Oscorp's greed and its plan to use their research as a weapon, and they ultimately paid for that decision with their lives. In the video, Richard also reveals another important piece of information. The drug created through this research will not work the same way in an ordinary person's body. Without Richard's own DNA or the DNA of one of his descendants, the effects could be deadly. Meanwhile, Harry's assistant Felicia tells him that the long-sought drug is still being stored inside a secret room in the Oscorp building. While using the device his father gave him to search through the company's information, Harry also discovers the full truth about Max Dillon's accident. He learns that after the accident, Max has been kept secretly imprisoned and separated from other people, while experiments are being conducted on him. At that exact moment, Donald Mencken arrives and places the entire situation on Harry. He blames Harry for Max's accident and Oscorp's secret research, removes him from the position of CEO, and takes control of the company himself. After losing his power, an enraged Harry realizes that he cannot win this fight alone, so he goes directly to Max. He offers him a deal. Max will be freed, and in return, he will help Harry. Most importantly, Max will be given the opportunity to take revenge on Spider-Man. Max agrees. He unleashes all the electrical power inside his body, breaks free from his captivity, and takes on his new identity, Electro. Now, Harry and Electro return to Oscorp together. After forcing Donald Mencken to reveal the information about the secret drug, Harry makes his way to the lab. After injecting the drug into his own body, it initially appears that his plan has worked. The symptoms of his disease begin to decrease, and his physical weakness seems to disappear. But this relief doesn't last long. Because Harry's body does not have the genetic connection required for Richard Parker's research to work properly, the drug instead triggers a terrifying genetic reaction. Within moments, abnormal changes begin appearing throughout his body. Harry gradually transforms from a human being into a powerful, deformed green monster, the Green Goblin. He takes the special armor, weapons, and glider stored in the lab and heads out. From that moment on, his only goal is to destroy Spider-Man and everything in his life. Meanwhile, Electro begins the second phase of the plan. He attacks the city's main power station and plunges the entire city into darkness. From hospitals to airports, a massive crisis develops everywhere. After hearing the news, Spider-Man immediately rushes to the power station. A terrifying battle begins with Electro. Peter realizes that defeating Electro through sheer force is almost impossible. But Gwen refuses to let him go alone. No matter how much Peter tells her to stay away, Gwen uses her intelligence to analyze the situation. Eventually, she realizes that Electro's body is essentially functioning like a giant battery. To stop him, they need to send too much electricity into his body and overload him. Peter and Gwen put that plan into action. Unable to withstand the tremendous electrical pressure, Electro's body explodes, and eventually his electrical power is completely drained. The city's electricity comes back on, but Peter still doesn't know that the real danger is not over. Because right then, the Green Goblin arrives. The moment Harry sees Gwen standing beside Spider-Man, he has no doubts anymore. He realizes that his childhood friend, Peter Parker, is actually Spider-Man. The humiliation of being denied Peter's blood, his disease, and the loss of his power at Oscorp, all of his anger explodes at once. Harry now targets Gwen directly. Using his glider, he grabs Gwen and flies into the air, trying to drop her from the top of a clock tower. Peter desperately rushes to save her. Somehow, he shoots a web and catches Gwen, and for a moment, it seems like he has managed to save the woman he loves once again. But the Green Goblin is not so easily stopped. He attacks again. During the intense fight, the structure of the clock tower begins collapsing. Gwen loses her balance and falls downward. Peter makes one final attempt to catch her with his web, but this time, luck is not on his side. Before Gwen can withstand the impact of the web, she falls to the ground and suffers a fatal blow to her head, dying right in front of Peter's eyes. At that moment, Peter feels as though he has lost his entire world. The person he was willing to sacrifice his life, his love, and even his own happiness to protect is ultimately taken from him right before his eyes. Peter begins blaming himself. He feels that if he had never pushed Gwen away, if he hadn't let his fear of the promise control so much of his life, perhaps this would never have happened. After that, Peter slowly withdraws from everything. He spends day after day sitting beside Gwen's grave. Eventually, he puts away the Spider-Man suit as well. Even though criminals begin taking over the city again, Peter seems unable to find the strength to fight. Meanwhile, Harry is kept imprisoned in a research facility. There, a mysterious man comes to see him. He tells Harry that Spider-Man is no longer active, making it easier for them to move forward with their plans. Elsewhere, Alexei Sitsevich, who escaped from prison, obtains a special suit from Oscorp and makes himself even more powerful. Wearing a massive mechanical suit, he transforms into Rhino and begins rampaging through the city streets. Ordinary people run in fear, and the police are unable to stop him. But at that exact moment, an old question returns to Peter's life. Can he really escape from being Spider-Man? The memory of Gwen reminds him that she always wanted Peter to do something for people and help those who were in danger. Finally, after 5 months, Peter finds his strength again. He puts on the Spider-Man suit once more, puts the mask back on, and returns to the streets of the city. Rhino is waiting for him, and another new battle begins for Peter. Although the pain of losing Gwen will remain inside him forever, that pain reminds him once again that being Spider-Man is not just about having power, it is also about responsibility. And this is how the most difficult chapter of Peter's life comes to an end. But his story does not end here. Friends, up until now, we've been listening to a brief explanation of this movie. Now, we're going to learn about some hidden twists in this movie that will fascinate us and give us a lot to enjoy. So, let's get started. The first twist: Richard Parker destroys his own research with his own hands. Everyone thought that thieves had come in and destroyed the research. But in reality, Richard himself kills the spiders and destroys them. He does this because he knows they could cause serious problems, and he doesn't want his discovery to be used for harmful purposes. He also wants to keep his children and other people away from the danger for their own safety. Right at the beginning of the story, we see something that may initially look like an ordinary incident inside a research laboratory. But the important research involving spiders in Richard Parker's lab was actually one of the most dangerous discoveries in the entire story. Through this research, it was possible to create a serum that could not only regenerate damaged cells in the human body, but also greatly enhance physical abilities. From the outside, this looked like a huge blessing for humanity. But Richard understood very well that if a discovery like this fell into the wrong hands, that blessing could instantly turn into a curse. Norman Osborn, the owner of Oscorp, did not want to use this research for medical treatment. His plan was far more dangerous. He wanted to turn the technology into a biological weapon and use it for military purposes. But Richard was never willing to allow his research to be used against humanity. So, when he realized that his discovery was going to be forcibly used for another purpose, he made a difficult decision. Richard destroyed the most important part of his own research. He killed the genetically modified spiders in the lab so that no one else could get their hands on the original source of his technology. In other words, if it initially looked like some thieves had broken into the lab and destroyed the research, the truth was completely the opposite. Richard himself had made the decision to destroy the research. This reveals an important side of his character. Even though he was a scientist, he was more concerned about the misuse of his discovery than the success of his research. He knew that if he preserved his research, he might have created one of the greatest scientific discoveries in history. But if that discovery were used to harm people, then that achievement would have no value. And it wasn't just the research. For the same reason, he also kept his son Peter away from him. That night, Richard and his wife left Peter with his aunt and uncle and secretly departed. As a father, it's easy to understand how painful it must have been for Richard to leave his young son behind. But Richard knew that if Oscorp's people found him, not only would his own life be in danger, but Peter's life would also be at risk. So, instead of keeping his son close to him, he chose to leave him somewhere safe. In other words, Richard's intention was never to abandon Peter. He had to distance himself from Peter in order to keep him alive. Most importantly, Richard knew that even if his research had to end, Peter would eventually need to know the truth. So, he secretly preserved evidence of his research, his discoveries, and Oscorp's conspiracy. He left behind a way for Peter to eventually understand why his father had suddenly disappeared. So, Richard Parker's decision wasn't simply the decision of a scientist to destroy his own research. It was also an act of sacrifice from a father. By destroying the work of his own life, he tried to protect his discovery from falling into the wrong hands. And by sending his own son away, he made one final attempt to protect Peter. Yet the result of that decision was that Peter eventually grew up and came face to face with a truth that would ultimately lead him toward becoming Spider-Man. The second twist: The serum only works with the Parker family's blood. There is something special about the drug that doesn't work the same way in everyone. Its special quality is that it works when the blood comes from the Parker family. Harry assumed that the serum would work in anyone because it was a serum created in a laboratory. But that wasn't the case. It turns out that it specifically matches Richard Parker's DNA. That means it works with members of his family. One of the most important mysteries in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was hidden inside that special serum, which at first might seem like some kind of miraculous medicine for humanity. Richard Parker's research was intended to regenerate damaged cells in the human body and cure genetic or serious diseases. But when Harry Osborn learns about the serum, he assumes that since Peter gained extraordinary abilities from the results of this research, the same serum should work in his own body as well. The situation is even more important for Harry because he is suffering from a hereditary disease that had gradually become more severe in his father's body. His hands have started shaking, his body is becoming weaker, and he knows he doesn't have much time left. So, Harry sees his last chance at survival in Spider-Man's blood. But this is where the real twist comes in. When Peter refuses to give Harry his blood, Harry takes it as a personal insult. But Peter actually knows how dangerous it could be to put Spider-Man's blood into someone else's body. Because the changes that occurred in Peter's body are not simply the result of an ordinary drug. There is a deep connection between the genetic structure of his body and the special formula from Richard Parker's research. Later, when Peter discovers his father's old research video and documents, the situation becomes even clearer. Richard had already realized that the serum would not work the same way in everyone's body. In particular, it has a specific compatibility with the genetic characteristics of the Parker family. In other words, the abilities Peter gained were not simply the result of a spider bite. His own genetic makeup was also important to the process, and this information becomes Harry's greatest danger. When Harry finds the serum in Oscorp's secret room, he doesn't want to wait anymore. He has only one goal in front of him: to cure his disease by any means necessary. He believes that if the serum enters his body, he will become healthy again. But he doesn't know that the transformation that occurred in Peter's body was not an ordinary medical treatment for everyone. After Harry injects the serum into himself, it initially seems like his plan has worked. The symptoms of his disease decrease, and his strength returns. But this relief doesn't last long. Very quickly, abnormal changes begin taking place in his body. His cells begin going out of control, and although his strength increases, his body also begins transforming in a horrifying way. In other words, instead of curing him, the serum makes the genetic problem inside him even more dangerous. Eventually, Harry transforms into the Green Goblin. One thing is especially important to notice here. If Harry had understood from the beginning that the serum wasn't meant for everyone, he might never have injected it into himself. But his fear of death and his desperate desire to survive blinded him so much that he ignored the risk. And this is why the difference between Peter and Harry is so important. Peter received the transformation in a genetic environment that was compatible with Richard's research. But Harry forcibly introduced the same thing into his own body, even though his body was not prepared to accept that transformation. So, the same research that turned Peter into Spider-Man works in the opposite way for Harry, and turns him into the Green Goblin. The greatest tragedy is that Harry wanted to gain Spider-Man's powers, but he didn't understand that the secret behind becoming Spider-Man wasn't only in the serum, it also depended on the Parker family's genetic inheritance. And because he didn't know that truth, his attempt to save his own life ultimately turned him into Peter's most dangerous enemy. The third twist, Max's admiration for Spider-Man turns him into a villain. Throughout the movie, we see that Max simply wanted to admire Spider-Man. He never wanted to oppose him. and he never wanted to become his rival either. But because of the overwhelming reaction of the crowd, anger begins building inside him. That frustration and resentment start taking over his emotions. Max Dillon in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is not introduced as a villain from the very beginning. Instead, his character is written in a way that makes the audience feel sympathy for him first. He is an ordinary electrical engineer at Oscorp. He has no extraordinary abilities, and even in a crowd of people he seems almost invisible. Nobody at work really pays much attention to him, and in his personal life he is almost completely alone. But there is one thing he is deeply passionate about: Spider-Man. To Max, Spider-Man is more than just a superhero. He is someone Max believes can understand him. Or at least, that's what Max believes. Early in the movie, when Spider-Man saves him from Alexei Sitsevich, Max feels like Spider-Man noticed him specifically, even among all those people. That small moment becomes incredibly important to him. For someone who has spent his entire life being ignored, even a little recognition can feel like a huge amount of love. But this is where Max's story slowly begins to move toward darkness. While working at Oscorp, Max is involved in an accident that sends a massive electrical current through his body. The genetically modified electric eels and the chemicals involved in the experiment should have destroyed his body. Everyone assumes he is dead. But that accident completely transforms him. He becomes a living power plant. Electro. At first, Max is filled with almost childlike wonder about his new abilities. He doesn't understand what is happening to his body. But when he goes out into the city, people's reactions break him down even further, and the person he has always looked up to as his hero, Spider-Man, is suddenly standing in front of him. The most important thing is that Max still doesn't hate Spider-Man at this point. He wants Spider-Man to recognize him, understand him, and stand by his side. But the situation quickly changes. People around him become afraid of him. The police start shooting at him, and Spider-Man tries to stop him as well. Max begins to develop the mistaken belief that everyone is deliberately turning him into a monster. The man who was once a devoted Spider-Man fan begins to develop anger and resentment, and that is where the real tragedy of his character begins. Max was never a power-hungry villain from the start. He had no dream of taking over the world. He simply wanted someone to care about him. He wanted someone to see him as someone special. But years of loneliness, neglect, and the sudden arrival of immense power all come together and change his mentality. And there is another important factor. Just as much as Max loved Spider-Man, his expectations of him were equally high. So when those expectations are shattered, his love slowly turns into hatred. He begins to believe that Spider-Man never wanted to understand him. Instead, Spider-Man stopped him and stood against him. From that point on, Max no longer wants to hide his new identity. Max Dillon disappears and Electro emerges, a villain who can control electricity and has the ability to shut down the entire city's power grid. In other words, Electro wasn't born from a laboratory accident alone. His birth was also the result of a psychological downfall. Max's greatest weakness was his devotion. He had turned Spider-Man into such a powerful figure in his mind that when he felt rejected by the very hero he worshipped, the love inside him turned into a desire for revenge. That is what makes Max's character different from many other villains. He wasn't evil from the beginning. He simply wanted recognition so badly that, under the wrong circumstances, that desire ended up destroying him. And the greatest irony of the movie is that the man who once wanted to be like Spider-Man eventually turns that same Spider-Man into his greatest enemy. Twist number 4. Max's death was kept. Secret Max's death was actually kept secret and was never publicly revealed. This was done partly to protect the company and prevent the incident from becoming public. The audience could naturally assume that the accident had simply killed him, but in reality, Oscorp suppressed news of his death to protect the company's reputation. At first, Max Dillon's accident looks like nothing more than a horrific laboratory accident. While working in Oscorp's electrical research facility, he falls into a tank filled with genetically modified electric eels, gets hit by a massive electrical surge, and his body becomes completely motionless. Under normal circumstances, it would be easy to assume that Max died right there. But what Oscorp does after his supposed death becomes extremely important to everything that follows. The death of an employee like Max wasn't just a tragic accident for the company. It also had the potential to become a major public relations disaster. The laboratory where he worked was conducting extremely dangerous genetic research. If questions were raised about the safety of the experiments involving genetically modified electric eels, Oscorp could have faced investigations, criticism, or even legal consequences. That is why the company's vice president, Donald Mencken, decides that the incident cannot be allowed to become public. Max's death is covered up. In other words, even though an employee supposedly died in an accident, protecting the company's reputation became more important than the life of the person who worked there. And this is where one of the movie's biggest ironies comes in: Oscorp's. People believe Max is dead and assume the matter is over. They have no idea that the man they are hiding as a dead employee is actually still alive, but he is no longer. The same Max Dillon, the massive electrical shock and the effects of the genetic experiment completely transform his body. After being presumed dead, Max begins moving again. His body is now generating an abnormal amount of electrical energy. To survive, he begins absorbing power from electrical sources. And slowly, Electro is born. Think about it. Oscorp wanted to hide an accident, but by hiding that accident, they ultimately created a problem that would put the entire city in danger. And this secret information later becomes an important weapon in Harry Osborn's hands. When Harry begins digging through Oscorp's secrets using the device left behind by his father, he discovers what really happened to Max Dillon. He realizes that Max didn't die, and that the company has secretly imprisoned him and experimented on him. In other words, the very incident Oscorp tried to hide becomes evidence that can later be used against them. At this point, Harry is already terrified by the disease he inherited from his father. He knows he doesn't have much time, and he believes the secret behind Spider-Man's powers may be the key to saving his life. But when Spider-Man refuses to give him his blood, Harry becomes even more desperate. That is when he discovers that Max is still alive, and that his body now possesses enough power to control the city's entire electrical system. Harry realizes that Max isn't just a victim of a laboratory experiment. He is also an incredibly powerful person who could help Harry break apart the power structure inside Oscorp. So Harry goes to Max. He convinces him that Oscorp used him, covered up his death, imprisoned him, and experimented on him. At the same time, Harry offers Max a deal: freedom and the opportunity to get revenge on Spider-Man. In return, Max has to help him accomplish his goals. To Max, the offer seems like the perfect opportunity to get revenge. The company that had declared him dead in order to protect its reputation would now become the very company against which he would use his powers. And the Spider-Man he had once considered his greatest hero would gradually become his greatest enemy. In other words, the decision to hide Max's death was not simply about covering up an accident. The truth that Oscorp had buried to protect its reputation would later become one of the main foundations for the alliance between Harry and Electro. Most importantly, if Max had not been declared dead and the incident had not been covered up, perhaps he could have received treatment. His physical changes could have been studied, or some attempt could have been made to return him to a normal life. But the company's obsession with secrecy and maintaining its power pushed him into the shadows. And from that darkness, Electro was born, the living result of Oscorp's secret experiments, who would later take control of the city's entire power system. In trying to hide an accident, Oscorp had actually created a threat that would eventually become impossible to control. Twist number 5. The real reason Harry became a villain later. The real secret behind Harry's transformation into a villain was that he never imagined he would become one. Nor did he deliberately choose this path. Instead, a senior Oscorp official falsely blamed him and removed him from his position. It was this humiliation and his desire for revenge that ultimately pushed him toward becoming a villain. If we look at Harry Osborn as a villain from the very beginning, we miss much of the movie's real story. At first, Harry did not return with any plan to seize power or harm the city. After his father's death, his main goals were to take control of Oscorp, deal with the problems his father had left behind, and find a cure for his inherited disease. But the internal power struggle within the company quickly turned against him. After Norman Osborn died and Harry took control of Oscorp, many longtime executives realized that the new owner could become a threat to them. They had been running the company according to their own interests for years, but Harry began establishing control over them. As a result, they started looking for an opportunity to remove him. That opportunity came with Max Dillon's accident. Much of what was happening inside Oscorp was not actually caused by Harry himself, but the company executives found an opportunity to place the blame on him. Donald Menken portrayed Harry as a danger to the company and eventually removed him from the position of CEO. This is where Harry's life takes a dramatic turn. Just moments earlier, he had been the head of Oscorp, with control over the company's enormous power and resources. The next moment, he became an outcast within his own company. His father's empire, his own inheritance, everything seemed to have been taken away from him. And the most frightening part was that Harry was already terrified about his own life, just like his father. He had begun showing symptoms of the inherited disease. His hands were starting to shake, his body was becoming weaker, and Harry knew that the disease would eventually lead to his death. So losing his position was not merely a business humiliation for him, it meant losing what he believed was his last chance to survive. In this condition, Harry became even more desperate. He began believing that there was something in Spider-Man's body that could cure his disease. So through Peter, he asked Spider-Man for his blood. But Spider-Man rejected the request. From Peter's perspective, it was simply a decision to avoid a dangerous medical risk. He knew that his blood might not work properly in another person's body. But Harry saw the situation completely differently. To him, it felt as though, on the very day he had found his last hope of survival, Spider-Man had taken that hope away from him. Then Harry discovered that Max Dillon was being secretly held inside Oscorp. He realized that he still had another option. Max was no longer an ordinary human being. He had become a powerful entity capable of controlling enormous amounts of electricity. Harry immediately exploited Max's weakness. He convinced Max that Oscorp had used him, hidden his supposed death, and turned him into a test subject. At the same time, Harry offered him the opportunity to take revenge against Spider-Man. Max agreed, and this is how the personal anger of two different men came together. One wanted revenge after losing his life and his power, while the other had begun seeing his former hero as an enemy after being rejected by him. Their goals were different, but they had common enemies: Spider-Man and the Oscorp system that had exploited both of them in one way or another. But this was Harry's biggest mistake. He thought that after using Electro to achieve his goals, he would once again be able to take control of everything. What he failed to understand was that Electro was also using him for his own purposes. There was no genuine friendship between them, only an alliance built on mutual anger and resentment. Eventually, Harry returns to Oscorp, defeats Donald Menken with Electro's help, and gets his hands on the secret serum. but even the serum cannot save him. Harry still does not fully understand the real secret behind Richard Parker's research. The serum was compatible with the genetic characteristics of the Parker family. As a result, instead of functioning normally in Harry's body, it begins triggering horrifying changes. Instead of curing his disease, his body begins to mutate. The man who had been desperately trying to save his own life only moments earlier gradually transforms into the Green Goblin. So Harry's transformation into a villain was not the result of a single decision. Behind it were his father's death, his inherited disease, the power struggle within the company, the humiliation of being removed as CEO, Spider-Man's rejection, and the pain of losing what he believed was his last hope. And that is exactly why Harry's character is so important. He was not evil from the beginning. Rather, while trying to survive, preserve his father's legacy, and save his own life, he made one wrong decision after another. Each decision pushed him further into darkness. Ultimately, Harry was not turned into a villain simply because of his desire for power. It was the humiliation of losing his life and authority, his helplessness, and the fire of revenge that transformed him. And from that fire, the Green Goblin was born. Twist number 6. Gwen's presence reveals Spider-Man's true identity to Harry throughout the entire movie. Peter Parker keeps his secret identity hidden. Very few people know that he is actually Spider-Man. Even Harry Osborn initially has no idea that his childhood friend Peter is the masked hero. But interestingly, Harry does not discover Peter's identity through an investigation, hidden cameras, or a DNA test. Instead, one person unintentionally makes the entire mystery clear to him: Gwen Stacy. The incident takes place after the final battle with Electro. With the city's power system shut down, the situation has become extremely dangerous. Spider-Man is fighting Electro alone, but Electro's immense power keeps putting Peter in serious danger. At that moment, Gwen uses her intelligence and realizes that Electro is essentially functioning like a giant living battery. To defeat him, they need to overload his body with excessive electricity. Peter and Gwen put the plan into action together and eventually manage to defeat Electro. But Peter still does not realize that their being together at that exact moment has handed Harry the biggest clue to his secret identity. After Electro is defeated, Harry arrives at the scene. And what does he see? Gwen standing beside Spider-Man. At first, this might seem like an ordinary scene, but to Harry, it is anything but ordinary. Harry has known Peter since childhood. He knows how close Peter and Gwen are. He knows how important Gwen is in Peter's life. At the same time, he understands that Gwen's presence in Spider-Man's life cannot simply be a coincidence. By putting these two pieces of information together, Harry finally realizes the truth. Spider-Man is Peter Parker. Another thing was important for Harry here. Peter had already refused to give him Spider-Man's blood. At that time, Harry did not know why Peter was so firmly refusing to give him the blood. But now everything becomes clear to him at once. Peter cannot simply give him Spider-Man's blood, because Peter himself is Spider-Man. That means the person Harry had always known as his childhood friend had actually become the potential key to saving his life. But Peter did not help him. Harry's anger, which had already been building inside him, now becomes even more intense. He begins to believe that Peter deliberately refused to let him survive. But the truth was completely different. Peter did not know what kind of reaction his blood would cause in Harry's body. At that point, Peter still did not fully understand the true genetic limitations of Richard Parker's research. He only knew that the procedure was extremely dangerous. But by then, logic no longer mattered to Harry. In his eyes, Peter was someone who had a chance to save him, but deliberately chose not to. And once Harry realizes that Gwen is the person closest to Peter, He also understands exactly where he needs to strike to hurt Peter the most. That is why Gwen's presence is so important. She was not simply Peter's girlfriend. Unknowingly, she had given Harry the final clue he needed to uncover Peter's secret identity. After that, Harry directly targets Gwen. He takes her away on his glider and brings her to the clock tower. Peter follows him there. Harry no longer wants merely to defeat Spider-Man. He wants to use the person closest to Peter to destroy him emotionally. And this is where one of the movie's most brutal ironies becomes clear. Peter had spent his entire life hiding his identity in order to keep Gwen away from danger. Because of Captain Stacy's final wish, he had even tried to distance himself from Gwen. But ultimately, his attempt to protect Gwen is what brings her directly into the center of danger. And after discovering Peter's identity, Harry does not simply uncover his mask. He discovers Peter's greatest weakness as well, Gwen. That is why Gwen's presence was not merely an ordinary scene for Harry. It was the moment Peter's true identity was revealed to him, and at the same time, it marked the beginning of the chain of events that would lead Gwen toward her death. In the end, Peter may have been able to save hundreds of people as Spider-Man, but Harry uses the person closest to him as a weapon against him. And this event leaves a wound in Peter Parker's life that goes far beyond losing the woman he loved. It forces him to question his secret identity, his responsibility, and even his ability to protect people as a hero. Twist number 7. Spider-Man's refusal to give Harry his blood turns him into an enemy. There were many reasons behind Harry's transformation into a villain, but the fire of his revenge truly begins with one small rejection. And that rejection comes from someone Harry still knows as his old friend, Peter Parker. Harry is already living in terrible uncertainty about his future. His father had told him that their family carries a deadly genetic disease from generation to generation. The disease gradually weakens the body at a certain age, and Harry has already begun showing its symptoms. In other words, he does not have much time left. But while searching through Oscorp's classified information, Harry discovers that Spider-Man has undergone a unique biological transformation that might contain the key to treating his disease. For the first time, Harry sees a ray of hope, and the biggest reason for that hope is Peter. Harry knows that Peter can communicate with Spider-Man. So through Peter, he asks Spider-Man for help. He does not ask for anything extraordinary, just some blood. Harry believes that if Spider-Man's blood can be introduced into his body, perhaps the disease will stop. Perhaps he can escape death, but Spider-Man refuses. From Peter's point of view, the decision is not unreasonable. He does not know what kind of reaction his blood might cause in another person's body. If the blood or genetic material is used incorrectly, instead of curing Harry's disease, it could cause even more severe damage to his body. So Peter does not want to take the risk. But Harry is no longer in a position to look at the situation rationally. To him, this is his last chance to survive. On one side, his own body is reminding him of death every day. On the other, he has discovered a person whose body may contain the solution to his disease. So when that very person refuses to help him, Harry does not see the rejection as merely a medical decision. He feels that he is being deliberately pushed toward death. This is where Harry's attitude toward Peter begins to change. Before this, Peter was his childhood friend. Even after meeting again years later, there was still a sense of their old friendship between them. But now that friendship begins to be replaced by suspicion, disappointment, and anger. And the most important thing is, Harry still does not know that Spider-Man is actually Peter. So from Harry's point of view, it seemed like a masked superhero had the power to save him, but simply chose not to help him. But later, when Harry discovers that Spider-Man is actually Peter Parker, that rejection becomes much more personal, because now Harry thinks that Peter knew who he was his friend, knew about his condition, and still refuse to help him. This misunderstanding only fuels the anger and desire for revenge growing inside Harry. From this point on, Harry is no longer just looking for a way to cure his disease. He wants to punish Spider-Man. The person he once considered a friend now becomes the biggest obstacle in his life. And right at this moment, Max Dillon, Electro, comes into the picture. Max had also suffered from humiliation, neglect, and loneliness throughout his life. Harry realizes that he can use Electro's powers to stand against Spider-Man. As a result, their personal anger and resentment come together. Harry frees Max, and, in return, uses his help. But there's one very important thing to understand here. Harry was never sitting around planning to destroy the city from the beginning. His original goal was simply to save his own life. But as one path after another closes in front of him, he starts relying on the wrong people, making the wrong decisions, and eventually makes revenge more important than his own survival. Eventually, that desire for revenge forces him to make a decision from which there is no turning back. He injects himself with Oscorp's secret serum. At first, it seems like his disease has been cured, but within moments, the serum's severe side effects begin to take over. His body starts to mutate, his strength increases to an abnormal level, and Harry transforms into the Green Goblin. In other words, the revenge that began because of his desperation after being denied the blood he believed could save him, ultimately takes him down an even darker and more dangerous path. There was a huge difference between Peter's small decision and Harry's interpretation of that decision. To Peter, it was a warning. To Harry, it was betrayal. And this misunderstanding slowly puts two old friends on opposite sides. One becomes Spider-Man, and the other becomes the Green Goblin. The saddest part is that if Peter had been able to fully explain the truth to Harry at that moment, or if Harry had understood that Peter wasn't rejecting him, but was actually warning him because the treatment could put his life in even greater danger, the story might have turned out very differently. But by then, it was already too late. Harry had convinced himself that Spider-Man had refused to let him live. And that belief ultimately turns him into Peter's most dangerous enemy. Twist number 8. Gwen's father's final wish keeps Peter away from her, setting up the tragedy. After Gwen's father dies, Peter carries a promise that, on the surface, seems like a simple decision made to protect the person he loves. But as the story moves forward, we realize that Captain George Stacy's final request actually becomes one of the foundations of the tragedy that follows. When Captain Stacy was still alive, he didn't see Spider-Man as a hero at all. To him, Spider-Man was a masked vigilante who was taking the law into his own hands and operating throughout the city. And although he liked Peter, once he realized that Peter was actually Spider-Man, his biggest concern became the safety of his daughter, Gwen. He knew that Spider-Man would inevitably make enemies, and if those enemies ever discovered Peter's identity, Gwen could become one of their main targets as well. So before he died, Captain Stacy asked Peter to make a difficult promise: to stay away from Gwen's life. For Peter, this request was incredibly painful. He genuinely loved Gwen, but at the same time, he knew that ignoring Gwen's father's dying wish was not something he could easily do. So Peter finds himself trapped in a difficult situation. On one hand, he loves Gwen. On the other hand, in order to keep Gwen safe, he has to stay away from her. Because of this conflict, when Gwen asks him to come closer to her after the graduation ceremony, Peter can't simply spend time with her like everything is normal. He stands there carrying the guilt inside him. Eventually, when Gwen asks what is going on, Peter tells her the truth. Her father made him promise to stay away from her before he died. Naturally, Gwen is hurt. From her perspective, it seems like Peter is ending their relationship because that's what he wants. But Peter's real intention is to keep her safe. This distance gradually makes their relationship even more complicated. But this is where another major tragedy of the movie begins to take shape. No matter how hard Peter tries to stay away from Gwen, he can never truly stop loving her. Even when he doesn't openly stay by her side, he continues to look out for her from a distance. And Gwen can't forget Peter either. In other words, even though distance grows between them, their relationship never truly ends. And that unfinished relationship eventually brings them back together. Peter realizes that he can't keep denying his love simply because of a promise. Gwen also realizes that even though Peter pushed her away, his feelings for her never changed, and eventually they grow close to each other again. To the audience, this naturally feels like a beautiful moment. But when you look at the entire story, the seeds of future danger were already hidden within this reunion. Because when Gwen actively comes back into Peter's life, she also stops staying away from Spider-Man's life. Even during the fight against Electro, Peter repeatedly tells her to stay somewhere safe. But Gwen doesn't listen to him. Instead, she uses her own intelligence to help Peter, and eventually plays an important role in coming up with the plan to defeat Electro. But that same decision leads her directly into Harry's path. When Harry sees Gwen standing beside Spider-Man, he realizes that Peter is Spider-Man. And once Harry discovers Peter's identity, he quickly understands where Peter is most vulnerable. Gwen. This is where the biggest irony of Captain Stacy's final wish becomes clear. He wanted Peter to stay away from Gwen so that she would never be put in danger by Spider-Man's enemies, but even while Peter tries to keep that promise, he can't completely remove himself from Gwen emotionally, and eventually, the two of them come back together. Then Harry uses their relationship against them and kidnaps Gwen. Standing at the top of the clock tower, Peter wasn't just fighting a villain. He was facing his greatest fear, the fear of losing Gwen. Peter does everything he can to save her. At one point, it seems like he has succeeded. His web catches Gwen, but suddenly, part of the tower structure breaks apart, and Gwen begins falling again. Peter tries to stop her at the very last moment, but that tiny difference in timing is enough. Gwen dies. And that's when we truly understand how painfully Captain Stacy's final wish had failed. He wanted Peter to stay away to keep Gwen safe. But in the end, that distance, the guilt, their unfinished relationship, and eventually their decision to come back together all create a chain of events that puts Gwen directly in Harry's sights. Of course, Gwen's death wasn't caused by Captain Stacy's request alone. Harry's desire for revenge, Peter's secret identity being exposed, and Gwen's own decisions all come together to create this tragedy. Still, from the movie's perspective, the most heartbreaking part is this. A father's final wish was meant to keep his daughter safe. Yet even after trying to honor that wish, Peter ultimately couldn't save her. And after losing Gwen, Peter doesn't just lose the person he loves, he also loses his faith in himself. The person who once saved the city begins to wonder whether he even has the right to save anyone else when he couldn't save the person closest to him. That's why Gwen's death isn't simply the death of a character. It becomes the biggest emotional breakdown in Peter Parker's journey to becoming a hero. Twist number 9. Gwen is the one who figures out how to defeat Electro the E. Strategy that helps Spider-Man defeat Electro doesn't come from anyone else. It actually comes from Gwen. If we look at the entire fight, Spider-Man is clearly struggling against Electro. He simply can't overpower him. At that moment, Electro needs to be overloaded, and it's Gwen who comes up with the idea. The fight between Spider-Man and Electro is a battle where Peter's usual strengths, his powers, speed, and web shooters aren't enough because Electro isn't an ordinary villain. His entire body has basically become a living power station. As long as he can absorb electricity from his surroundings, he continues gaining more power, making him almost impossible to stop. At first, Peter tries to handle him on his own. He moves around at incredible speed, fires webs, avoids Electro's attacks, and tries to bring him under control. But there's one major problem. Peter gains absolutely no advantage from fighting Electro directly. In fact, the more electricity Electro absorbs, the stronger he becomes. Eventually, the situation becomes so dangerous that you can see Spider-Man isn't just fighting anymore. He's trying to survive. That's when Gwen arrives. Peter had already told her to stay away from this dangerous situation. But Gwen knows Peter isn't able to win this fight on his own. So once again, she puts her own safety aside and stands beside Peter. And this is where something really interesting happens in the movie. Even though Spider-Man has incredible abilities, the crucial solution for defeating Electro doesn't come to Peter, it comes to Gwen. Gwen analyzes the situation like a scientist. She realizes that Electro's body absorbs electricity and becomes more powerful because of it. That means simply giving him less electricity won't make him weaker. Instead, they have to push his body beyond its capacity. Simply put, Electro is functioning like a giant battery. As long as the amount of electricity inside a battery remains within its capacity, it can continue holding that energy. But if you force more energy into it than it can handle, it can no longer contain that energy normally. Gwen identifies exactly this weakness. Peter's job is to keep Electro trapped in a specific location, while Gwen's plan is to send an excessive amount of electricity through his body. The risk is enormous, because even the slightest mistake could cause the electrical surge to strike them instead. But this time, Peter isn't alone. Following Gwen's plan, they bring Electro near the source of the electricity. The powerful electrical current begins flowing directly into Electro's body. At first, it seems like his power is increasing even more. He becomes brighter, and enormous amounts of electrical energy begin spreading throughout the area. But that is exactly what Gwen planned. The more electricity Electro absorbs, the closer he gets to reaching the limit of what his body can handle. And then, the energy inside his body spins completely out of control. A massive electrical explosion completely destroys Electro's power. As a result, electricity gradually returns to the city. This moment is important because the movie intentionally makes one thing clear. Spider-Man can't solve every problem by himself, even though Peter is physically powerful, incredibly fast, and highly intelligent. He could never have won this fight without Gwen's knowledge and ability to analyze the situation. In other words, Gwen isn't just standing beside Peter as his girlfriend. She analyzes the situation herself, understands the nature of Electro's powers, and comes up with the strategy that ultimately saves the city. And that's exactly why this scene becomes even more important because of what happens next. After defeating Electro, Peter and Gwen finally feel a sense of relief. It seems like the biggest threat is finally over. But they have no idea that the real danger is still waiting for them. Because immediately after this battle, Harry Osborn arrives, and the moment Harry sees Gwen standing beside Spider-Man, one thing suddenly becomes crystal clear to him: Peter Parker is Spider-Man. So while Gwen's intelligence is what defeats Electro, her very presence at the same time exposes Peter's secret identity to Harry. And once Harry learns that secret, he immediately realizes the most effective way to hurt Peter. Everything that follows pushes the movie toward its most heartbreaking ending. That's why this battle against Electro shouldn't be viewed as just another action scene. During the first half of the fight, Gwen gives Peter the idea that ultimately saves his life. Then, by the end of that very same scene, her presence helps Harry uncover Peter's true identity. On one hand, Gwen's intelligence helps Peter defeat Electro. On the other hand, seeing that same Gwen beside Spider-Man allows Harry to figure out exactly how to hurt Peter. The most. That's the greatest tragic irony of this scene. The person standing beside Peter and helping him win in. That moment ultimately becomes the very person his greatest enemy uses as a weapon against him. Twist number 10. Spider-Man comes. Within inches of saving Gwen, but still fails throughout. The movie, Peter Parker saves countless people from danger. Sometimes it's passengers on a speeding train, sometimes innocent people trapped by criminals, and other times it's the entire city facing a catastrophic threat. Whenever danger appears, Spider-Man is always there. His incredible speed, web shooters, and ability to make split-second decisions make it seem like no one is better at saving people at the last possible moment. But in the movie's most heartbreaking scene, we discover that even with all of those abilities, he still can't save the person he loves most. And the most painful part is that Peter came incredibly close to saving her. After becoming the Green Goblin, Harry Osborn decides to take revenge by attacking Peter's greatest weakness directly. He realizes that physically defeating Spider-Man isn't enough. If he truly wants to destroy Peter, he has to take away the one person whose loss would change him forever. And that person is Gwen. Harry carries Gwen to the top of the giant clock tower on his glider. Peter follows him there and tries to stop him. An intense battle begins. On one side is Harry's overwhelming strength and high-speed glider. On the other, Peter is forced to fight, while also trying to keep Gwen safe at the same time. But as the battle continues, the situation quickly spirals out of control. Eventually, the massive mechanical structure inside the tower begins to collapse. Metal beams, giant gears, and broken pieces of the structure crash down all around them. In the middle of that chaos, Gwen loses her footing and begins falling. At that moment, Peter has no time to come up with another plan. There is only one thing he can do. He has to catch Gwen as fast as possible. Peter throws himself downward. As he dives at incredible speed, he fires a web from his web shooter. His only goal is to stop Gwen before she hits the ground. For a brief moment, it looks like he's done it. The web reaches. Gwen. Peter catches her. But this is where the movie delivers its most devastating moment. Catching someone with a web is one thing. Bringing them to a complete stop safely is another. Gwen is falling at such tremendous speed that Peter has almost no time to slow her down. And at that exact moment, the collapsing structure of the tower makes the situation even worse. That tiny fraction of a second ends up changing everything. Peter was almost there. He almost saved her. But in this moment, the word almost becomes the most heartbreaking word of all. Because when it comes to saving someone, sometimes not even a few seconds, less than a single second, can make all the difference. Peter's web does catch Gwen, but the sudden force created when he stops her fall is what ultimately proves fatal. Within moments, Peter realizes that something terrible has happened. He rushes over to Gwen and holds her in his arms. For a moment, it seems like maybe she's okay. Maybe it's not over yet. Peter looks at Gwen in panic and tries to speak. There's a helpless fear on his face that we rarely see throughout the entire movie. Because this time, he isn't trying to save a stranger. This time, he's about to lose the person he loves. But within moments, the truth becomes clear. Gwen is gone. What makes this moment so devastating for Peter isn't just that he lost her. It's the fact that he knows he tried to save her. He made it there. He fired his web. He almost succeeded. But at the very last moment, that tiny difference in timing caused him to fail. And because of that failure, Peter can't forgive himself. he may know that what happened wasn't completely under his control. Harry deliberately brought Gwen there. The tower was collapsing. The entire situation was completely chaotic. And yet, there's only one question that keeps running through Peter's mind. If I had been just a little faster, would Gwen have survived? He never gets to know the answer, and that uncertainty makes his pain even deeper. He has saved hundreds of people, but when it was time to save the most important person in his life, all of his strength, speed, and skill still weren't enough. That's why Gwen's death isn't simply a tragic event. It reveals one of the greatest realities of the Spider-Man character: a hero can't save everyone. No matter how powerful Peter becomes, he still has limitations. He can't see the future, he can't stop time, and he can't pull every single person out of danger at the last possible second. But for Peter, understanding that reality comes at a devastating cost, because Gwen becomes the proof of his limitations. And the most heartbreaking part is that he loses Gwen at the exact moment when it seemed like he had managed to save her. For one brief moment, there was hope. Then that hope was shattered, and after this, Peter can never be the same again. He doesn't just break down as a boyfriend, he also loses faith in himself as a hero, because the same moment keeps replaying in his mind. If the web had reached her just a little sooner, if Peter had moved just a little faster, if he had been given just one more moment, maybe everything could have been different. But in the end, he didn't get that extra moment, and that's exactly why, even after coming so close to preventing Gwen's death, Spider-Man is forced to face the greatest failure of his life. Friends, so far we've been going through some of the hidden twists in this movie. I hope you've enjoyed them. Now let's review the movie itself. For all of these details, we'll be discussing information from Wikipedia. First, this movie is the sequel to The Amazing Spider-Man, the first movie in the series, and it was made as a continuation of the story established in the previous film. The movie was directed by Mark Webb, and the screenplay was written by 3 writers: Alex Kurtzman, Roberto Orci, and Jeff Pinkner. The story was written by 4 people: Alex Kurtzman, Roberto Orci, Jeff Pinkner, and James Vanderbilt. The movie was produced by Avi Arad and Matt Tolmach. The cast featured an incredible lineup of actors and actresses, including Andrew Garfield, Emma Stone, Jamie Foxx, Dane DeHaan, Campbell Scott, Rhys Ifans, and Sally Field. The cinematography was handled by Dan Mindel, the editing was done by Pietro Scalia, and the music was composed by Hans Zimmer and the Magnificent Six. The movie was produced by Columbia Pictures, with Marvel Entertainment also involved in the production. It was distributed by Sony Pictures Releasing. The movie was first released in Tokyo on March 31, 2014, and was finally released in the United States on May 2, 2014. The running time was 142 minutes, and the language was English. The movie initially had a reported budget of around $200 million, but the final production cost reached approximately $293 million at the box office. The movie earned around $770 million. That means it was a major commercial success and gained a huge audience around the world. Friends, that's all for our explanation today. Let me know in the comments what you thought of the video, and if you enjoyed it, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you, everyone.